Hello and welcome. I'm Greg Soul, and this is the Why Am I podcast, where I have conversations with interesting people to try and trace a path to where they find themselves today. My guest for this go around is Daniel Lenick, a retired homicide detective from Baltimore. For someone who is used to asking the questions, he really was great about answering my questions open and honestly, and really, what more can you ask of the folks in your life? I have a trigger warning on this one, as he gave me varying levels of anecdotal information, and some of them were a bit graphic. I could handle it, and generally I'm not super crazy about graphic stuff, so I think it's probably going to be okay for most folks. They were all in service to illustrate his various points, so none of it was gratuitous, but nonetheless, exercise some caution on this one. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Daniel Lenick. Daniel Lenick, thank you so much for joining me on the Why Am I podcast.
That's great to be here, Greg. Thanks so much.
Excellent. So I'm going to start this one out the way I have started beginning most of them, right? In the very beginning, I did a little bit different. Now I'm letting you kind of speak your own truth. So you and I are in line. No, we're not in line. We're at a party. We're at a party somewhere, somebody's birthday party. We both were invited. We're strangers. We're bored standing near the pool across from the barbecue pit, so we can make sure that they're cooking those steaks perfectly the way you like. And I tell you what I do for a living, and what do? I say I'm a manager at a Domino's. And then we talk for a second, then it's your turn to reciprocate. Who are you?
Well, I am a retired homicide investigator. I worked for 25 years in police work, and 20 of those years I was actually a detective. I was really fortunate to start off as a detective. I did about 4 years. I did about almost 5 years on the road, and then I did about 4 years as a burglary detective. And then for the remainder of my career, I worked in the violent crimes homicide unit, and I loved it, man. I was just hooked with the challenge. I was hooked with the rewards that came with that. And I even turned down a promotion along the way just because I felt like I was really doing what I was supposed to be doing. So I just enjoyed that. People ask me if I miss it. I say I left everything on the field when I left. The thing I do miss, though, I miss the everyday camaraderie. A group of guys, we could just joke, we could be ourselves, we could just, do the gallows humor, we could do everything. So after I retired, I lost count, but it was probably about a little over 400 death scenes that I was on. Not all of them were homicides, obviously, maybe about 10%. So I really thought it was important to just kind of deconflict a little and just kind of try to get, normal, whatever the hell that is. So I just took some time off. And then now I am getting involved in a few projects. I'm writing a book where I want to, I'm maybe about 35,000 words in. I really want to tell the story of sort of what defines a detective that works homicide is you see a lot of graphic, but you have to maintain your sense of humor. And I've always thought that was the utmost importance, to keep your sense of humor. You can be really serious about this stuff because it's very serious. It can be depressing. It can be all of those things. You have the fallout, the victim's family, what they have to deal with. But you really have to keep your humor about you. And so the book is really about sort of blending the graphic with the sometimes ridiculous humor that you have to rely on. And then I'm also fortunate. I've met some really interesting people, like on LinkedIn, for example. And so I've been in talks with a guy for developing a show sort of along the similar vein, where the main character would actually be a real homicide investigator, and he would be You loved him because he was good at what he did, but he would say the most inappropriate shit at the most inappropriate times. But it worked because his end product was the successful conclusion of a case. So you sort of put up with these things, and once you realize, oh, this guy's heart really is for getting some justice for the victim, then you kind of tolerate him. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I've written enough notes for us to talk for about 6 hours, so that's a very good start. The first thing that popped into mind is it sounded like you said you started as a detective. Is that common, or rather, am I correct in that? And is that common?
No, I actually started off in patrol.
Okay.
So what happens is you go through the academy, and after you get out, you get off your probationary period, you're in uniform. So most people, what I have found is that if people can do, people can do like 3 to 5 years on the street, then they're handling all different diverse calls, all different types of people. There are plenty of police officers that get into this line of work, and they're sheltered when they start. They have their certain group of people that they hang out with, and they've never had to deal with this kind of group of people. And so for me, it was about 5 years. I worked as a uniformed patrol officer, handled, obviously thousands of calls. And then after that, I became a burglary detective, and I worked burglaries for 4 years. And then that gave me the added experience of really interviewing and interrogating and kind of honing those skills. One of the things that I always heard this, but found it to be absolutely true, is with a homicide, people actually will have a reason to talk to you because they can maybe gain something from it. In burglaries, if you're the suspect, there is absolutely zero for you to gain by confessing to it, and absolutely everything to lose. So in my opinion, they are the absolute hardest nuts to crack, to get them to confess to that, because they have everything to lose. And people are surprised when I say that, but oftentimes it's very difficult to get information from them versus someone that committed a violent crime.
That's interesting. So if you're a burglary suspect, is it the best thing for you to do is just to shut up? Is that the idea?
Keep your big mouth shut and you'll be fine.
That's interesting. So one of the real questions, so I always like to try and write down some stuff just to give me an outline of where my head's at, and what I'm really most interested in. One of them actually was dealing with, I had assumed that you started out as like a beat cop, or a patrolman, doing all that stuff. And then you said you transitioned over to burglary first. So you were a detective in burglary. And I guess that kind of sort of prepared you for being a detective. But then I know at some point there had to be this shift where you went burglary to homicide. And so I'm curious, it's like, how did you, well, one, what were your expectations when you were going to go from burglary to homicide, and how did you kind of like mentally prepare yourself? Because I'm assuming, you were, getting yourself ready to deal with, homicides. You were not just, folks that, expire and you have to go investigate of natural causes, but also homicide and all of the fallout from that. So it's like, how did you kind of, one is, what were your expectations, and how did you prepare yourself for that?
Well, I guess in the kind of the gestalt, there's actually a little bit of a backstory to answer your question. And I haven't really gotten to share this with too many people, so it's kind of cool that you actually asked me the question the way that you did. When I first started out on police work, when I was in the academy, my idea of police work was, I'm gonna run down an alley or in a field, and I'm gonna chase a bad guy and tackle them, which I did when I was in patrol, and I'm gonna tackle them because they committed some crime in front of me or whatever. I'm gonna help some little old lady change a tire on the side of the road, which I've helped a little old lady change a tire. But beyond that, the, having being an investigator, much less a death investigator, was the absolute farthest thing on my mind when it just was not on my mind. And maybe about 2/3 of the way through the academy, I had the most fascinating experience. I never had an experience like this before, and I've only had less than a handful after. I was sitting in the academy, and the sergeant from homicide came in to give a presentation to a bunch of recruits on this is what you do as a uniformed patrol officer at a death scene. This is what you don't touch. This is what you do. This is what you don't say. You know, the whole 9 yards. Well, he started sharing cases that he personally worked, homicide scenes that he was personally on, or other various death scenes that he was on. And unlike TV, when you're watching this stuff and they make it sexy and they make it pretty and they do those things, when you're actually sitting there and you're looking at the screen and you're looking at someone who actually died, and then you're coupling that with the person who's presenting the material as the actual person that was there handling the case, it stuck in my gut. And as I was sitting there, I very, very clearly inside of me, I heard the following thing, and it was deep down in my gut. What this man is doing, you are going to do the exact same thing. Now, I was raised in a lower class, socioeconomic family. I didn't have much in the way of goals, and those sort of things never were really instilled in me. And so again, I didn't have any kind of paradigm to compare any of this to. I just knew what I heard inside, and I knew, like, oh, okay. Well, when that was spoken inside, and I this thing reverberated inside of me, Greg. Within 9 years, I was standing in front of recruits as a homicide investigator, and I was teaching them the very things that this sergeant was teaching me that day. This is what you do in crime scenes. And then there were other classes that I taught on interviews and interrogations. And I thought I went from having no direction at all to just graciously, this thing came to me and set me on a course. So when you asked earlier, what were my expectations? That was the beginning of my expectations, because I was not naturally drawn to that. And so as I got into the job, I became more interested in, when I would work a case as a patrol officer, I would do the follow-up. So, in patrol, it's go, 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 go. Everything you do today is forgotten about tomorrow. In investigations, it's the complete opposite. You get a case assigned to you, it's yours until you put it down. And so I just was drawn to that work. When I was in burglary, a lot of times what happens was you would be on call for something that came out in the middle of the night. And so it was not uncommon if there was a simple, what appeared to be a run-of-the-mill suicide, or like a death by some sort of hazardous accident, you would have to go out and handle it. So as a burglary detective, my very first death scene was a guy that committed suicide, and he blew his brains out with a shotgun. He lived in, I'll never forget it. You don't forget your first cases like that. He lived in a double wide trailer on Route 1 on the boulevard. The trailer was beautiful. It was he was married. It was in immaculate condition. And he made a hell of a mess in the bedroom for his wife to clean up, or for his wife to have to deal with and call us. And so as I was dealing with that, I realized this is where you're leading. So learn from this scene, because it's going to be the one of many. And that became my expectation. I knew that it was just going to be more. And for me, it was school. It was just, each case was a fascinating lesson in learning about the human body, learning about the psychology of what people do to one another. Sorry to be long-winded on your answer, but that's kind of the answer to the question.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, for me, it's not necessarily the yes/no answer to the question. It's all the pieces that you talk about. And so whenever I'm looking down, I'm furiously writing notes because I pick up all these interesting bits off of here. I mean, I think that's interesting. I guess the moment of clarity, kind of that light bulb moment when the homicide detective was in front of you and you knew, like, and there's been once or twice in my life where there's been, I guess, like a watershed moment where something happens and I'm like, yeah, this is what I'm going to be doing. Like somehow or another, I'm going to be part of this. And, and it ultimately has guided my life. Some of those events probably for the rest of my life, they're going to influence the way I think and feel and all that stuff. One thing you mentioned, which was another question I'd written down, is you said deep down in your gut, you knew it. And so that's something that's always kind of interesting. And I'm going to diverge. I'm going to go all over the place and then we'll loop back around. But intuition, I've always wondered, because people say, like you see it on TV and all this stuff, I'm following my gut, I'm following a hunch, right? And intuition, is that really just, sometimes is that really just experience and you're just calling it a different name? Or like, is the gut or intuition or hunch, is that something that's completely different that, I don't know, maybe makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up and you can't exactly understand why? Like, is that a thing?
Yes, it's a thing. The short answer is it's a thing. To kind of parse the two statements that you said, yes, the hair on the back of your neck goes up. I had a guy, his nickname was Ski. He was a MS-13 gangbanger, and he viciously killed a rival gang member. He and another guy, he decapitated the victim while the second suspect literally popped the victim's eye out with a crowbar. And then they got back in the car and laughed about it as blood was on their shirts. They were just evil. And I've gotten to travel the whole country on cases. I never thought that would happen. And I was part of this federal ATF federal task force for a year. That case was sort of the central case, and we were looking at a number of MS-13 cliques. They're called cliques, and they usually like 10 or 12 guys run in a little pack. And this one particular area near us, it had about 8 or 10 of these cliques. So we're talking about maybe 100 gang members, and they were just brutalizing the area. So I called a break, found out who this guy was, and I had to interview him. I'm almost 6'2". I'm not a big guy, but I'm tall. So I'm about 6'2". This guy was about 5'3". And when I interviewed him, I flew down to North Carolina. He was being housed in a section of a county jail down there. And I walked in the room. He didn't say a word. And the back of my neck, from the lower part of my spine all the way up, just tingles all the way up. And I've sat across the table from 3 serial killers in my career, and I've had the exact same reaction on all 3. And his was no different. Before he even opened his mouth, you just knew that there was a really dark, evil presence you were dealing with here. And interestingly, like all 3 of these guys, they all had that 1,000-mile stare. Like they just had an empty soul look in their eyes, and they were just off in somewhere else land. So it definitely is a thing. I just was thinking of this funny story. I had this lieutenant when I was working in homicide, and we're very good friends today. Now that we're both gone on the job, we were friends back then, but I mean, like, there's not that separation of, he's a couple of ranks higher than me. We're just, we're equals now because we're about the same age. And this case had gotten reassigned to me, and the first investigator, there was just some issues with the way she worked the case. But she believed that the suspect, she rightly identified the suspect. It was just some peripheral things were going on that clouded that. And so he said, look, he didn't like that she thought it was this person, and he said, you were talking about instincts, and he said, I want you and such to look into the case. I said, okay. So I looked into it. So after a while, I had to go back and I had to report to him. He's like, well, what are you finding? I'm like, Lieutenant, my instincts are just telling me that so-and-so was right on the money. It is this person. And he looked at me, and whenever he got upset, like his lower lip would start to quiver, and his finger like this. And he looked at me and he goes, now we were friends, keep in mind. And he goes, fuck your instincts, Dan. Fuck your instincts. So we continued working the case. I sat him back down and I said, look, with all due respect, I know you said, to fuck my instincts, but the bottom line is such and such was right about this. It is that person. And I would have liked nothing more than to prove her wrong, but she's actually correct in this. So yeah, there's definitely something about your instinct. And I do think part of it is experience. It's not even necessarily work experience, but it could be life experience. There's some patrol guys that were young on the job, and they just had a street savvy about them, and they could just drive down the boulevard or drive down the street and be like, that car's dirty, that guy's about to do something in that convenience store, and they'd quick make a U-turn and they'd be right. So definitely something to it. Is it always 100? No, we're imperfect creatures, but I would put my percentage very high on trusting the gut when it talks to you.
That's interesting. So some of the stuff you said confirmed something I read in a book one time. It was this book called The Wisdom of Psychopaths. And I actually took some life lessons away from that. But one of the things that really fascinated me in there was they were doing an interview one time with, man, I can't remember. It was a very famous serial killer like John Wayne Gacy or Jeffrey Dahmer or something like that. And they were asking him, how do you pick out your victims? And he said, I can tell who my victim is going to be just by the way they walk. And so that kind of stuck with a researcher that was like interviewing him. So they actually put an experiment together where they had these people walk down the end of a hallway, and then there was a little sheet of paper there or something. And basically there was a question that said, have you ever been victimized? And they would write yes or no, and then they would walk back. Well, they videotaped it. And they showed it to like criminally dangerous psychopaths in prison. And like exponentially high, they could pick out all the people who had been victimized. And so they were surmising that there are some individuals with these psychopathic predatory natures that can just, like in nature, sense out the weaker ones in the pack. But they said conversely, they've also found that there are people that can pick out those predators, and usually how they describe it as whenever they are around one of these people or they see one of these people, the description is almost uniformly that the hair on the back of their neck stands up. So they were saying that yin and yang, you usually find that in nature. So there's some predators that are good at picking out prey, but then there's also some of the standard population that can really hone in and pick out those predators based on, just intuition, whatever you want to call it, right? It's these little, the body language of the person or just something about them, they could pick it out. So the fact that you said you've done that with several people, maybe you're one of those folks that has that preternatural ability to kind of sense that danger. Did you ever think about that?
I think about perception as a gift. Like, for example, like I was telling you when we were emailing a while back, I checked out your brother's Wisp podcast and maybe 15 minutes, and I didn't know the damn word you were saying, Greg. And it was like I had a new respect and admiration having recently met you. But I thought, here's a guy whose gift is in this tech area. It's how you're made. It's how you're wired. And it's a gift that's been given to you. Some might say it's a gift of God, however whatever language you use. And I think there's a lot to be said for, in our line of work, there is almost this animal-like mentality that that sort of the subculture of people display. It is almost on a level. It is almost not much higher than animal thinking. sleep, eat, screw, and get one over on someone. That's a lot of the mentality, right? And when you said that, I thought about some of the times where I had to go, like, for instance, in Baltimore City on many cases and serve search warrants and just deal with people trying to round people up to get information or whatever. And, I kind of stuck out for various reasons. One of the reasons being my skin color in a city that's predominantly non-white. The other one is just like we have instincts to say, for instance, be in a room with a serial killer, street people can spot most cops a mile away. And a lot of it is, you touched on it, a lot of it is body language. For example, we wear a gun. When you're in patrol, you have this big-ass belt on that you're wearing all day. And a lot of times, like if you're right-handed and your gun is right there, your right arm is stuck out like this. And so without realizing it, you develop this pattern where you walk and your arm naturally sticks out. And it's a body language cue that people on the street that are savvy to that kind of stuff, they pick right up on it. So yeah, those kind of things do cut both ways. And so the serial killer can tell by the gait of a person, that's a weak ass person right there. That's a person who's very insecure. I just noticed it yesterday. I looked out my front door and I saw two guys and a woman that were walking down the sidewalk, and both of the guys had their heads down while they were walking and their shoulders were kind of slumped. I'm like, these weak ass guys, come on, man, get your head up and walk. You're a man. I mean, I'll spare you what I really said, but I thought, be a man, walk like a man. Don't walk like that. You look stupid. But if that person were in Baltimore City or some other place, or some serial killer would look at them and go, easy target right there, easy target. So a lot of it, yeah, is how you carry yourself. There were plenty of times I went down there, I was scared shitless, but you don't show it. You just carry yourself a certain way.
So something else that I picked up on just a second ago is you said, you described some of these individuals as evil. And so I'm curious, how does that factor in? And like when you're thinking about folks and you see these guys, do you ever think of them as, I think psychopathy, right? Like if you have like a mental disorder, if you're somewhere, on the range of that stuff, I think a lot of times you're born with that. But what do you think, nurture versus nature comes in on some of this stuff? Maybe somebody could be naturally a bit aggressive, but then you throw them into kind of a gang environment and that just gets accelerated, right? Do you think that has a lot to do with these evil people, to use your phrase in there?
I think if I had to give my personal opinion, I would put a large percentage on nurture. You could start in the family and say lack of fathers, number one problem. You don't have that father figure to guide you, to discipline you, to help you, to encourage you. Certainly a huge factor. If you even just remove that from the mix, and now you're in a culture of people that facilitate a bend towards getting away with stuff. I'll give you an example. I told you earlier, I was on this task force for a year, and probably 70% of the time I was traveling around the country, or I was local, and I was in a jail interviewing some MS-13 gang member. And one of the things I discovered was, for the most part, as long as you went in and you came in low and you said, yes, sir, no, sir, I'm not here to judge you. I'm not here to get up in your ass. I'm just here to talk to you for a little bit. As long as you were respectful, they would talk to you. And without question, every last one of them that talked to me, and this was for a year, I went in and out of prisons talking to all these gang members, guys that were in there for committing one or two separate homicides. And within a few minutes, they would open up. And I might say to you, Greg, what are you doing today? And you'd be like, well, I got this podcast I'm working right now, putting it together. I ask my guests about fantasy, restaurants. It's a good ice. It's fun. We get this conversation going. It's opening up. And then later on, I'm going to probably grab some lunch with a buddy, going to go home, maybe catch a movie, go on a date, whatever, right? These guys, without fail, what are you doing? They're either robbing someone, raping prostitutes in a puteria, in a whorehouse, or assaulting someone up to and including homicide. And how did it start? It starts because the no father kid in this poor section at 12 years old is minding his own business, walking down the street, and all of a sudden one of the older gangbangers say, "Hey, come here a minute." Kid walks over and he says, "Do me a favor." And he hands him maybe the equivalent of $10 in that culture. And he says, "I want you to go up to the corner market and I want you to buy me a soda and go ahead and buy yourself one." Kid comes back and goes, "Here's your change." No, keep the change, kid. He gets the kid to do that for a couple of months, maybe 6 months, maybe a year. Now the kid gets older. "Come here." Kid comes over. "Yeah?" Now they have a relationship now. Here's this guy. He gives me money to go. I get treats. I get sweet treats. Maybe I get a little whipped cream on my drink. Gets this right. And then he says, "Hey, do me a favor. Wash this car here. I'll give you $20. Hands him $20. Now the kid's rich. He's got $20. He doesn't even, to him, $1 is a lot. Now he's got $20. Washes the car. This goes on, right? 12, 13, 15 years of age. So it goes on for 5, 6 years, 7 years. Kid gets to be an older teenager now. Now all of a sudden that same gangbanger says to the kid, "Hey, come here." Kid walks over. He goes, "You see that guy right there? Yeah. Want you take care of him." Now, in that gang, there are only certain people that have that authority to say, "You take that person out." It's called a green light. If you, as the fellow gang person now, don't listen to that instruction and carry that out, now someone's going to put a green light out on you. You don't have. Now, before, I could say, I'm 12 years old, and I could say, "I don't want to go up to the corner and get you a soda, motherfucker," and then you could run away. But you get older now, you're acclimated. So the nurturing, that banger has taken the place of your father, and he has been so nice to you, quote unquote, for 5 or 6 years, buying you all these sweet treats or giving you money in exchange for you working hard and washing his car. But now all of a sudden he surprises you and he says, "Take that guy out." And if you don't listen, it's either take that guy out or someone's going to take you out. So it's sort of chilling when people like us are just trying to go along, live our lives, just be quote unquote normal, whatever that is. But in this subculture of thinking, or this barely above animal level thinking, it's a whole different set of rules that people live by.
That's wild. So it sounds like these gang members are groomed from like an early age. And I knew like through just listening to podcasts and stuff about like sex traffickers, a lot of times those young girls or boys, whatever it happens to be, they're groomed over time. And I never, for whatever reason, I never thought about the same thing for gang members.
It's a huge enabling or dysfunctional relationship that's formed, not unlike the the pedophiles or the sex trafficked kids form these these dysfunctional relations with their handlers.
Yeah, there's this podcast I've been listening to for a long time called Ear Hustle. You familiar with that one?
No.
Well, it was really interesting for me. It's they record it inside of San Quentin prison out in California, and it's basically recorded by the inmates. Just all the stuff that kind of interests them, and kind of a day in the life. And it's so funny. Before listening to this podcast, it was always inmates or criminals, right? Like I just knew them by that name. And you get in here and you start hearing these stories, and they actually become these humans, and they have done these bad things. But then you start unraveling where they came from. And, it was like how, it's kind of like, if you make a hammer, like you take a piece of steel and you make a hammer out of it, you can build a house, right? You can create all these amazing things. Well, you take, a piece of metal and you make it into a bullet, and when it kills somebody, why would you be surprised by that, right? And so a lot of these people, they were just shaped from like these so young, formative ages, in these environments. And it's like, why would we expect them to be any different? And it's tragic.
It's incredibly tragic, Greg. And when you said that, I had this flash in my mind. I was working this homicide one time, and I found an informant who wanted to provide some information. And he was, I mean, I'd call him a criminal, a career criminal. He'd spent, I'd say like 15, 18 years. Guy was like in his late 30s in jail. So I met with him, and he was the type of informant where his information was good enough for me to slide him some money. So I met with him to give him his money, make him sign the paperwork. So I'd officially signed him up as a confidential informant. And so we're meeting, and of course, it's all secret. It's in the dark, whatever. And so he starts talking to me, and we're talking for about 10 or 15 minutes about nothing but finances. And this, a lot of guys, they're just full of shit. They just talk a good game, and that's just life. That's just life. This guy knew finances because he was mainly in jail because of drug trafficking. And I thought his nickname was D. I said, D, damn, if you had just put all this stuff, I mean, you could have been the president of a company, running your own company. I mean, the guy was just like, you would rattle off tech. This guy was rattling off numbers. Like, he just knew them, like bam, bam, bam. And his mind quick, was sharp. And so, yeah, I think about that kind of stuff many times with some of these people. You think, God, if you had been born here instead of here, or if you just had this influence instead of this influence, how different would your life look? And, for us as having to police this kind of stuff, it starts with like you're on the road and you lock up someone for drunk driving, and they're just a flaming asshole to you. And they're either maybe they're not a happy drunk, maybe they're a violent drunk. And so you're fighting them, you handcuffing them, maybe you find a gun under their seat or a knife or whatever. And you think, holy shit, you do all this stuff, and you get to court, and it always happens, they always want to talk to you before court. So you think, oh great, you knew what an idiot this guy was. By and large, so many of them will come up to you before court even starts, and they'll say, look, I'm not looking for anything. I'm going to take exactly what the judge gives me. I just wanted to tell you I'm sorry. I'm sorry I acted like such an asshole to you that night. And then you start talking to him a little bit, and you're like, this guy's actually okay. He just was under the influence. And that's kind of a microscopic picture of what we're talking about here. Is a lot of these people, you do wonder, like, damn, if they had just been given another chance or better parenting or something, like how different they could be. You actually want to hang out with them. They're actually, nice or fun to be around or smart.
Yeah. In one of those Ear Hustle episodes, there was this one guy who basically said he bought these tacos at the shack, and on his way home, like some kids came and stole his tacos, and he's like, that was the turning moment for me. He's like, that's when I decided I needed to be in a gang because I was tired of getting bullied and pushed around. It's so funny to think about how life can turn on a dime like that, right? And obviously it didn't turn out well for that kid. But I guess life sometimes feels like this random series of events, and you and I, our turn on a dime stories could have ended very differently, right? We're not so different than a lot of these other people.
That's exactly right.
That's wild. So something else you talked about earlier, so I'm going to take you way back, is you were talking about you pick up a case until you put it down. And so whenever you said that, immediately, I don't know, like I saw it in my mind as big, like letters carved in stone, because that sounds really heavy to me, right? Like huge responsibility. Like, is that how you felt every time you were picking up one of these cases? Like, this is on me. This is all me. Did you ever feel like you had, so this is some of my bias here, is like, I always feel like everything's my responsibility and I can't ask for help. Obviously you guys work in a team environment, and you're supposed to be collaborative and stuff, but it's like, how much of that do you take on yourself? Like, how much of that weight do you feel whenever you're doing this stuff?
I think every every murder investigator, every death scene investigator I've ever had the privilege of working with, whether it was in my department or teaming up with other guys from other departments, to the last person, you own the case. You're the primary responsibility, so it's on your shoulders. And guys before me that I looked up to that were detectives, I'd go to them and seek advice from them, and they said the same thing. You lose sleep, you take the case home, because the problem is, you're in this job. If you're in this job for the ideally good reasons, there's a strong sense of, like, I've always had a thing for the underdogs, and have this strong sense of getting justice for people. And the biggest underdog is the person that can't speak for themselves, and a dead person literally cannot do that. So you are their voice. So it's turning in your mind all day long. It turns in your mind at night, especially when you're laying there. You're just thinking of what more can I do when you've reached that brink. And yeah, it does not leave. I had a case when I first got into homicide, before the hot ones were coming out. My sergeant wanted to give me something to do. So he's like, I'm giving you this old case. It was 11 years old already when I inherited it. It came out as a missing person, but the husband actually killed his wife. It was the Christine Jarrett case. And it took me 10 years to be able to put that down. And the reason why is because in a cold case, typically the way you're going to solve a case that's super old like that is some relationship is going to change. And when that relationship changes, you seize on the opportunity. So what I'd noticed was there were, I think, 4 or 5 other investigators that had handled the case, throughout the years. And I noticed when I was looking through the case file that they all kind of approached it as, well, she's a missing woman and she just left. And so they would do little computer checks to try to, see credit card activity or anything like that. And I said, I'm just going to try to approach this as if it's a brand new homicide that just came out today. I'm going to go back, I'm going to start re-interviewing every single person that was there. And so I got to a point, very long story short, I got to a point where I felt like I was convinced it was the husband. And I was 1,000% convinced that he buried her in his shed. After he buried her, he poured cement, made a floor. Then he built a new shed over top of the existing shed. Then he tore the old shed down and called it a day. And that was almost accurate, except he didn't actually lay a cement floor. What he actually did was he took 4 bags of cement. He mixed the cement just outside the shed. He then poured that mixture of those 4 bags of cement literally on top of his wife's body. And then he took some pea gravel and he covered the floor over. And then he took some floorboards and he put the floorboards over top of the pea gravel. Well, the way the case changed was he remarried within less than 6 months of his wife's disappearance. His second wife moved into the house. They were married for almost 20 years, and he was not simply a flaming asshole, because he was a flaming asshole, but also a drunk on top of that. So there was some that caused a lot of issues with the wife. And he finally left and met up with the love of his life. It was this barmaid who he used to see after softball games. His team would go there, and he tried to hook up with this woman. And he was married, she was married. Finally, now they get to be together. So he moves maybe like 2 hours away from where he lives, over the Bay Bridge in Ocean City, Maryland, to be with this woman. And so this woman's sister actually contacted me and said, I'm scared for my sister because we think that he killed his first wife, and now that looks like they're on the verge of divorce, she doesn't want to leave the house, and he wants her out of the house. Well, he wanted to be in the house because obviously the first body's buried there. So I went and talked to her, and I said, hey, I have this theory. I've been working this case for a long, long time. And way back when, I actually was doing all kinds of stuff, Greg. Like I had back then, the Air Force had some ground penetrating radar, and nowadays that's very common equipment to use. But back then, that was like the only game in town. I was trying to get on the property that way. Couldn't. The person at the Air Force wanted to help me, but we couldn't cut through the red tape. Then I had back then. Again, now it's standard. Cadaver dogs are in just about every department, or you can just a neighboring department you can grab one. Well, back then it was all private, and we only had one in our entire area. So I contacted the guy and I said, "Look, I think I can get on the property. It would be a very thin search warrant, but I'd like to have a dog, cadaver dog, look around the shed." Excuse me. And I had done some research, and I had discovered that they actually had a case up in New Jersey where this mafia guy killed a victim, buried him, and then built an in-ground swimming pool. And the dog actually smelled through the cement of the swimming pool. And the guy had been buried there for like 9 years. So it was like right on the cusp. And I thought, man, if I can get a dog on there. So the cadaver dog company guy said, "Oh yeah, I'll get the dog to hit." I'm like, "Say that again?" He's like, "Don't worry about it, detective. I'll get the dog on there. We'll get him to hit." I'm like, "No, man, it doesn't work that way. Like, the dog's either going to hit or the dog's not going to hit. I don't need you to fake the dog hitting. I need it to actually do it. We have to keep this clean." So I thought, I can't use this guy. So consequently, that pushed everything back for years because the probable cause was really thin to begin with, and now I just essentially had none. So I told this woman, I said, "Look, I have this theory. I think your husband's first wife is buried in the shed. The only way I'm going to be able to find that out is if you'll allow me on the property and to be able to bring some equipment and dig up." She's like, "Do whatever you want to do." So I literally left, rounded up a bunch of people, including crime scene techs. I'm like, "Get the equipment. We're going down there." And we went down there and we started burying. I could talk to you about that case for hours. It's fascinating. I forgot actually what you were asking me, how that led. About a case, you keeping a case. So that case stuck with me for 10 years. It was 21 years until her death was avenged. But her bones were under there. The guy that I had caught up with, he was our only cold case investigator. And so the case eventually got turned over to him. And so he and I would work the case together, and we would try to figure out different approaches to it. And he's a super nice guy. He was a retired homicide detective from another jurisdiction. And he was like the straight guy, just straight man. Like I was always had to like get him to crack a smile or whatever. So he would hardly ever joke around. And we got there and we started digging, and I'm on one side of this jagged cement structure, and he's on the other side. We have a crime scene person who's sifting through buckets that we're handing her. And all of a sudden he said, "Hey, Dan," he goes, "come here for a second." And like just the tone in his voice, like I knew. And I walked around and he goes, "Look at that." And I looked underneath, and there was the victim's patella was sticking out. And I just chills on the back of up and down my arm. I'm like, "Holy shit, Nick, we just put down a 21-year case murder." And here's how it worked. We high-fived each other and were beaming from ear to ear, and that lasted all of 30 seconds. And then for the next 30 seconds, we were rapid fire talking to each other like, "Okay, we have to do this, we have to do that, we have to get a search warrant, we have to do this now, we have to do this now, blah, 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 blah." That lasted for about 30 seconds or a minute. And then I said, "The first thing we have to do is we have to walk up this hill." The lady's name was Martha. I said, "We have to walk up here, and I have to tell Martha that her husband's first wife is buried underneath this shed." And the shed, every time she looked out her bedroom window, she could see this fucking shed. Excuse my language. So we went up there. Dude, I've had people yell at me before. I've never had somebody 6 inches from my face scream at the top of their lungs as loud and as long as this woman did. I mean, literally, veins were popping out of her forehead and her neck. And I just told her, "Just keep squeezing my hand, Martha." And she, I mean, just the pain in her was just I'd never experienced something like that. For a reaction to tell someone that their loved one was, or that someone was dead, it was nutty.
That's wild. That's wild. That's, but I guess, oh, there's so many questions in here. But I guess you guys, your first initial elation, that's totally understandable. But then the fact that you had to do all this stuff, I guess whenever you make a discovery like that, you have to be very careful, right? You have to do everything by the book 100%, especially when this thing's been 20 years in the making. You don't want to screw anything up, right? Last minute.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, you pride yourself on everyone cuts corners. Everyone in every job cuts corners. But there are certain things you absolutely do not cut a corner on. You write a good police report, and it's saves you a lot of hassle in court when you're being cross-examined. But legally, there are just certain things. It's a lot of work, but it's not worth cutting the corner on. So in that case, she's giving us permission. He still lives there. So once we discover the body, then everything stops. Now we secure the scene, get a search warrant, and then come back. So that was kind of cool because I had worked with this forensic anthropologist on a couple of other cases, and I called him, and he brought a whole team of people there. And he's like, I am really surprised how well preserved. Him pouring the cement on the victim worked against him. It actually preserved her more. And one of the other things he did was he threw her pocketbook, and they had two small kids at the time. I think they were 8 and 5 or 9 and 5. I forget, something. They were real small. Pictures of them and her wallet were there. And I mean, what's he going to do? Say a monkey climbed out of the tree and like grabbed this lady and beat her over the head and killed her? And then, I mean, of course it's him. So yeah, so you just don't cut the corners. You just do everything right, and it saves you a lot of problems down the road.
I guess on something like that, whenever what makes me wonder about is, if it was a fresh murder, something that just happened, and you went to court, everybody's reaction I feel like would be more visceral, more real, and on the surface. But 20 years later, whenever you see everybody in court, is it still just as real for all those people, or do you think time kind of muted that a little bit?
Time absolutely did not mute any of it.
Wow.
Her one niece, actually, the reason I got assigned the case is because a niece who loved the victim prompted, made a phone call to the sergeant and said, hey, look, I just want to let you know we still are hoping someone's looking into this. And so the two sons are now grown. They were just, imagine this for a moment. You are a little kid, and daddy, who is your everything, you look up to this guy, he tells you, mommy disappears, no more questions. That's it. He sweeps all that shit under the rug, no more questions. And so your entire young life, your entire teenage life, and your entire adult life up to that point, you've had to deal with what you think is your mother abandoning you. Now the big bad cops come along and go, hey, good news and bad news. Good news, if you want to call it that, we found your mom. Bad news, it was your dad all along. Well, you can just imagine the fallout from that. So the younger son, he was not real keen on us for the longest time. He eventually came around, but he was daddy's boy. I mean, they worked on cars together, blah, blah, blah. The older son, he knew what the deal was, and basically he said, fuck you, Dad, and didn't want to have anything to do with him, didn't visit him in jail or anything. So it tore open a lot of emotional, legitimate stuff that these guys had to deal with. I might also add the brother of the suspect was one of the most squared away guys I had ever met. He was an owner of like an HVAC company or whatever. And, we had to, among other people, we had to interview his family, which was several siblings. I think the mother was still alive. And I, asked him the standard, what do you think should happen to the person who committed this? And he said, well, they should get what, they deserve, the full arm of the law or whatever. I said, well, what if it's your brother? And he said, well, sadly, if it's my brother, he should get it also. And he sat through the whole court trial, and he contacted us afterwards because he was 100% convinced that after the trial was over that it was in fact his brother. And so you kind of get these little unique surprises along the way. You think, all right, this is the suspect's brother. There's no way this guy is going to be responsive to us at all. And he was nothing but fully cooperative and saw things for what they were and saw that his brother did in fact commit the murder.
That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, I would have thought that some of that would have, they say time heals all wounds, but I guess not every wound. Some of them don't close, huh?
Nope.
So while we're talking about cold cases, you said, well, I guess you didn't exactly say how you got a hold of this. You said it was, when you were first getting started, you got a case assigned to you and you went with that. And I'm wondering, as a detective, you get assigned a case, it doesn't get solved. Do you at some point relinquish that, or is that case with you until you retire and then it moves on to somebody else? How does that work?
If it's a homicide, it's yours for the entirety. And then if you move on, you retire, you promote out of the unit or whatever, then it goes to the next person. So, and then who's ever up in the rotation for the next one, they get the next homicide, and then that's your responsibility until it gets put down. So yeah, I think my very first, that was a cold case. So I don't really consider that my first one in the sense of, I'm coming in to get coffee, and before I even put my keys down, the phone rings, going out working a case. And my very first case, actually, my partner and I knew who it was within 2 days. We had identified the guy, and just through a whole series of shit, it was 5 years until we put it down. The guy was actually, he ran drugs from California to Maryland. So this is post 9/11. Pre 9/11, he had a mule on this end, and he had a connect in LA. So he would get his dealer in LA would get somebody to ship the drugs from the airport to Maryland. Then a mule would pick the drugs up and deliver the drugs. Well, my victim was this suspect's stash house. And I won't go into the whole case, just say there were a lot of legal snags and other snags that we had to get over. But you never put it down because it's yours. And so what was really interesting was, in that case, it was the Edwin Yates case. His brother Joe was an air traffic controller up in New York, and actually was working the day one of the planes hit the tower. And when the case first came out, he would call me every day, and then it went down to about once a week, and then it went down to about once a month. And he's like, I'm not trying to pester you or bother you. I'm only calling because I just want you to, it helps me just you. And I'm like, yeah, of course. And I'm like, you're not bothering me. And he's like, I just want to know, I'm like, you have my absolute word. I'm not going to give up on this case. I will work it and do the best that I can. And we had this relationship every day for 5 years until the case went down. And the case ultimately went down because we flew out to Kansas, I think it was, where the guy got popped, him and his roommate. And he copped to a federal charge for the interstate drugs because it was a heftier charge, but he still had to walk across the street and admit to the homicide. And so I got to meet the family. The victim's family had like 10 or 11 brothers and sisters, including Joe. So I got to meet them, and it was it's bittersweet. It's weird. It's like, yeah, like I'm happy to be able to do this, but at the same time, it's like you got to look at these people's faces, and it's like, they're the ones that have to suffer because their brother or their son has been killed by this asshole. But yeah, so to answer your question, it always stays with you.
And I guess when you're getting ready to meet these people, you have to prepare yourself for any reaction, right? Obviously they're going to be upset, and I would assume that, you can't just completely turn off. That's gotta affect you a little bit, right?
Yeah, well, the weird part is, like they say, like anybody can have a gun and shoot you. And so that's why, like, for instance, every time you make a traffic stop, you're assuming every single person that you're stopping is armed. You just have to think that way for your safety. Well, it's the same thing when you make a death notification. You have you absolutely cannot look at a person and go, oh, they're an older white lady, or oh, they're a 20-year-old black kid from the street. Like everybody is so different in their reaction. So I've had, big 350-pound burly guys want to cry on my shoulder and break down when I told them, grandma killed herself by an over whatever. And then you have other people, then you have grandmas whose kids have killed themselves with a gun, and they were like zero reaction, like none, stoic. So you just don't know. I had this one lady, she was screwing this guy, and he killed her best friend. Her best friend was a bail bondswoman who did her a favor by giving a bond for this guy. He didn't want to pay her, so he fucking killed her. And we had to go down to the city. We needed her information. So among other things, I had to notify her that the boyfriend, 20 years younger than her, that she's been screwing, killed this woman. Well, she came at me. She was gonna choke me out. I'm like, that would not be a very smart idea on your part. You want to put your hands down and not try to choke me out. So you just never know how people react. Some people break down. I had a lady faint on the porch. She had 3 little kids. Her husband had a massive heart attack, died outside. It was a hot summer day, and they were young. He was like early 40s, I think, 42, something like that. It's been a while. And her kids were on the inside, and 2 of them were bouncing on the couch through the bay window. As I'm telling her, I'm like, I hate to tell you this, but unfortunately, your husband died, and she fainted right there. We had to catch her. If we wouldn't have caught her, she would have fell on the swing, probably hit her head on the porch swing. So you just never know how people are going to react to the news. And yeah, like you have to put your face on. It's kind of interesting, like when these things happen, or if you're looking at something graphic, or if you're dealing with this highly emotional thing, you just tend to compartmentalize. You turn all that stuff off so that you can do what you need to do, and then you just kind of process it afterwards. Like I found for me, my afterwards was way, way afterwards. Like when I was at the end of my career and I knew I wasn't going to be handling any more cases, I was just weeks from retiring. I was driving around the area and I was literally having these flashbacks because I would drive past, like I drove past this one church. There was this homeless guy went in, killed the 2 people that worked in the church. It was super bloody. And I just started having a flashback of that. And then I drive other places and have these flashbacks. So probably for a year after I retired, maybe 6 months, I would have flashbacks to some of these scenes. And I realized, that was just part of the process of turning all that stuff off at the time to get the job done. And then just kind of dealing with it after the aftershocks.
Yeah, that leads into several of my other questions, and I still want to circle back on some stuff there. But so I think of it as like yourself and a lot of people, like ER doctors, right? People like that, surgeons. They, you guys put on a uniform when you go to work every day, but I think also you put on like this invisible emotional uniform, right? You have to be prepared. You have to like be in control, right? Because that's what people want to see from you, right? For one, everybody's looking at you, right, to see how to react. I mean, that's one step, but also, right, you have a certain level of expectation that you're going to be in control of the situation yourself, and people need to see that. And it always makes you wonder, folks like that, and I think you kind of touched on it there, is that you get so accustomed to doing that, it becomes such a requirement just to survive in your job. It's like, are you able to turn that off when you go home? And it sounds like for a good portion of your career there, you put that uniform on and you couldn't necessarily take it off for a while. Do you feel like now that you're retired? Well, and it sounds like, so many questions. I know I'm asking too many in rapid succession here, but this is kind of how my brain works. It's like a stream of consciousness. It sounds like there towards the end of your career, maybe you started opening yourself up for a little bit of nostalgia, just kind of thinking, it's like, reflecting on your career and things like that. And then maybe that you started getting cracks, some chinks in the armor, and those things started slipping out. And so you've got a little bit of time in retirement now. Do you feel like that's completely opened up? I'm just curious. It's like, how did that affect you in your personal life? Like, was there ever a time where you caught yourself thinking, I should have really reacted differently, in my personal life, but I'm still wearing that emotional uniform thing? That's number one. I would say that. Did you ever catch yourself being a detective in your personal life?
Well, I would say if you've been a cop for a number of years, whether you're in patrol, whether you're a detective, you can't turn that stuff off. Like, for example, a big thing with cops is you go somewhere, you go into a restaurant, your back's going to be up against the wall so that you can see the door, and then so you can see everybody around you. And to this day, my wife knows when we go into a restaurant, she'll say, like, for instance, we were out in Florida with my son and daughter-in-law. We were just celebrating life and vacationing a little bit. We went to this really nice restaurant. No charcuterie boards, by the way. No prickly whipped cream. But we went in, and my wife turned to me, and because the waiter was seating the ladies. And before my wife sat down, she looked at me and she pointed at my chair. She goes, "Is that good?" Because she knows, like, that's kind of the routine. I'm like, "Yeah, we're good. We're good." And so there is in my opinion, there's a healthy compartmentalization that you do. And that keeps you healthy for when you do go home. So, for example, I worked an hour away from where I lived, and I didn't work in the same county that I lived in, which I could have done that, gotten some extra benefits like a car or whatever, but I chose not to. I was further out, was further away from that, and so on my hour back home, that was my time to just work through everything the best I could. And what happens is you just sort of like the gallows humor. You're there, you're on a really super graphic, maybe a guy literally blows half of his head off with a high-powered shotgun or a pistol or whatever. And you're just simply doing what you need to do. And so you do just turn it off. Now, I will tell you this. There was a case, Pamela Myers. I told you I sort of have this thing for underdogs. And she was the ultimate underdog. She was homeless. She lived in this homeless camp with her boyfriend, who was the suspect. And they shared this camp spot with another couple that lived behind them in their own tent. And one morning, the four of them were sitting around fire, and the suspect, Ricky was his name, literally took a jug of gasoline and poured it on Pam's head. And it went all down her face, all down her neck, and all down her shirt. And then he started taking a lighter. And he said, "I'm going to fucking light you on fire, bitch," for whatever infraction she did. And he lit her on fire. And the other two people saw him light her on fire. And so she was burnt. I think it was 90 or 95% of her body was burnt. It was absolutely horrific. And she had friends. I mean, she had a phone. She had friends that she was in contact with. And I met up with those friends. And those friends were, as you can imagine, were devastated. And so, you go to the autopsy, but at some point I had crime lab. She was taken to a burn center. We have a really good burn center downtown in Baltimore. And they took pictures of her, and I'm looking at these pictures, and I've seen people burnt before. I've worked cases where they were burned or where they had skin slippage or whatever. And I'm looking at this woman because she was still alive and could feel this pain, according to the nurse that was taking care of her, because she was responsive to some of the questions. And she ultimately succumbed to that and died. Well, that just fucking bothered me like you can't imagine. And I got the call. Oddly enough, my son today is a pro drummer. He's in Nashville. He's a drummer down there, and he was real involved in the marching band. They had a really good program in his school, and they would go to these competitions all over the country, and they would win. They would win these competitions. It was really cool. I was part of the pit crew for moving the equipment around. It was fun to go to these things and watch their school perform. And he was at a competition at my college alma mater, was where they were having this competition. And so they were in between performances for the finals. And we were taking a break and we were having a dinner. And I just gotten, it never fails. As soon as the food comes, the call comes. And I just gotten notified by my sergeant that I had to respond for this homicide. And so I'm thinking, here I am trying to be a normal person, trying to have a life, trying to do what everybody else does, just want to spend time with your family or whatever, see my kid, be proud of him or whatever. And I have to go deal with this asshole doing this ridiculous thing. But that's not really what drove me. What drove me was no one deserves to die that way. Pamela Myers did not deserve to wake up and have gasoline poured over her head just to be lit on fire and to die. Edwin Yates, I was telling you, his brother called me every day for 5 years. The reason Edwin got killed is because he smoked up everything that was in the stash house. He was the stash house. He was keeping the product there for this guy so he could make a couple extra bucks on the side. By all accounts, Edwin was a nice guy, but he was just committing something illegal by keeping all these drugs at his house. Well, then he smoked him up and he never paid the suspect back, so the suspect killed him. Well, I don't care. In my book, I don't care who you are, whether you're Pamela Myers, whether you're Edwin Yates. You don't deserve to die that way, viciously, at the hands of someone else pretending to be God and deciding to take your life from you. So what drives you then is this justice, to see this justice meted out. You put your personal feelings about how this is affecting you. You just turn all that off. Now, years later, I think about it, and yeah, sometimes it affects me because I think, wow, this is X amount of years have gone by. What could this person have done with their life? What could they have been? Pamela might have been able to get out of those circumstances and done something productive with her life. But she never got that chance because this asshole decides to light her on fire.
What really, and this is again a personal thing for me, as a kid, at some point, feeling things was dangerous. Having a reaction was dangerous in my life. So I learned to suppress that stuff, to turn it off. But the problem was, for me, I couldn't just turn off like specific reactions. I had to turn everything off. And so for most of my life, I didn't feel stuff, which was good and bad. I didn't really have lows, but then again, I didn't really have highs because I had learned to suppress everything so much, right? I didn't get to pick and choose, I didn't get to pick, just turn off the bad stuff and then only have the, like if life were only that simple, right? And so it makes me wonder for guys like you, where you have to compartmentalize, you have to shut down. Does that mean you're also denying yourself some of the good stuff? And I mean, I've always enjoyed humor, and I always make off-color jokes at all the wrong times. You should see me at funerals. It's pretty unbearable. Right? It's just that's how I cope with. This is my coping mechanism, right? Do you feel like having to compartmentalize meant you had to turn off some of the good stuff too?
Most definitely, yeah. People say, you sacrificed a lot in your career. You gave up sleep, you gave up a lot of family events, blah, 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 blah. But I think if I had to say the number one thing was you can't be as open to certain things because you're kind of always on guard. Your guard's always up, or your mindset changes in general when you become the police. there is a certain cynicism that has to happen, because the community is paying you to find out what's wrong out there. Me personally, the way I'm wired, like, I don't really like going out and finding something wrong with you. Like, I didn't really enjoy, when I was on patrol, I didn't really enjoy giving people tickets, writing a person a ticket. I don't like punishing people that way just so that, the government can make money and have a bigger coffer. I'm just not wired that way. So I would much rather approach people, relationships in general, with some sort of redemptive aspect to be gained by it. And so falling into being a detective, it did afford me that, because then you can take someone who legitimately suffered at the hands of someone else, and you can at least get a small piece of redemption for their family or just them. I've had cases where I had a guy one time, he was stabbed 20 times. Rigoberto Zavala was his name. He was from El Salvador. I'm sorry, he was from Guatemala, and he came here, and he was a single guy. He had no family here. And so we became his voice. And he made the mistake of hitting an 11-year-old, whopping an 11-year-old. How do I put this? Some Hispanic people that I've met that have come to this country are some of the absolute hardest working people I've ever seen in my life. They will work to the bone from crack of dawn until late into the night, because they're trying to make a better life for themselves by coming here. Well, financially, they're at the bottom of the ring, not unlike the people that came off of Ellis Island and replaced the next person and became the bottom, right? And so a lot of times in this Hispanic community, what we would see is we would have 2, 3, 4 families sharing one tiny apartment together, or like 11 guys share like a 2-bedroom apartment. And then, they would all sleep on the floor just until they could kind of make a little higher step on the ladder, right? And so this case, it was 3 families: the victim, another family who was married and had 1 small baby, and then the suspect and his common law wife and their 2 kids. They were all cramped in this little tiny apartment. One day, the victim and the suspect's 11-year-old boy found themselves home together alone, and the victim found out that the little boy was going into his knapsack and stealing like little incidentals, coming into his room and stealing them. So he caught him doing it. So he decided to do like a little street justice, and he took the TV remote and he hit the kid over the head with the remote. And he said, "Don't steal stuff out of my knapsack anymore." Well, as soon as the suspect, got home, the little boy ran to the father and said, "He hit me over the head with a remote control." Suspect goes to the victim and says, "I'm the father. Don't you fucking touch him. By the way, get yourself some flowers. You're going to need them." An obvious thing to your funeral. The next week, he gets 2 people to help him, drive him up. One of them's his cousin. One of them's the driver. They drive. They go in. The suspect stabs the victim 19 times, and he makes his cousin participate, and the cousin stabs 1 time. I don't know where I was going with that. I completely lost my train of thought.
It was about having to turn off everything, not just the bad stuff, but the good stuff too.
So you're looking at this guy and you're like, really? Okay, maybe he shouldn't have hit the kid over the head with a remote control. But he sure as hell did not deserve to get stabbed 20 times on every vital organ of his body. And we've all heard the expression, "he bled out like a stuck pig." I can say from that moment forward, I had never seen that much blood in an area. And from that time until all the other cases that I've handled, I've never seen something that ridiculously bloody. And it got to the point where he lost so much blood. And then when I got there, the bile had actually separated from the blood, so there were two very distinct piles. And so you're looking at this and you're like, holy shit, really? This is why the guy ultimately dies. But you just have to turn that off and say, I got to find out who did this, because if he did it to this guy, he can do it to somebody else. Well, it turned out he did do it to somebody else. He had killed 5 other people. The victim was from Guatemala. The suspect was from El Salvador. The suspect had killed 5 other people while he was in El Salvador. And I had to go to Nassau County, New York to track his ass down. And when I was interviewing him up there, he admitted to killing this guy. And I'm like, you know what? I'm already here. I might as well just take the lead. Because his cousin was the one who I was able to get him to tell me that, the suspect had killed these other people. So I just made some bullshit up about having all these contacts in all these South American countries, blah, blah, blah. I just went with this line of bullshit with the guy. And I said, so I know that you've killed before. So I'm going to guess the number of people that you've killed. If I'm right, you buy me a cup of coffee. If I'm wrong, I'll apologize for having guessed too low of a number. I put it to him that way. And of course, he picked right up and was like, oh, no, 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 no. And I'm like, 6? Because the guy told me he had killed 5 plus my victim is 6. And I said, 6? And he goes, oh, no, 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 no. And he turned to my translator because the interrogation was in Spanish. He didn't speak any English. And he goes, he knows. And the translator's like, what? And he goes, he knows how many people I've killed. And I said, okay, well, how many? And he said 5. So he would not admit to the 6th one, which my theory was always it was either a family member or it was likely a little kid, and he didn't want to make that jump. So you think that those are the reasons why you turn everything off. Those are the reasons why you compartmentalize, because what's at stake sometimes, not all the time, but what's at stake is if they did it once, they can do it again. Well, who's it going to be next time? Is it going to be someone they know? Is it going to be a random neighbor that pissed him off because he said something stupid? So that kind of becomes your mindset.
That's crazy to think about. Like me as a kid turning that stuff off, that was survival, right? That's why I did that. But you are an adult person and you're willfully choosing to do this so that you can perform this job that not a whole lot of people want to do, right? It's in service to all these other people that have zero concept of denying yourself like some of the base pleasures a lot of other people have in life. And it's, what did it, I think it was Robin Williams said, everybody you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about, right? And so that, I can't imagine that not coloring. I mean, you said you did this for 20 years, right? At least the homicide piece. I mean, you were in the police force longer than that. So it's modifying the way you think and feel to help others for, 25% of your lifetime, maybe more, maybe 30%. I mean, the average lifespan of a male is not that long. So I guess, maybe more like 40% for us. It's just, it's kind of wild to think about in those terms. Like I just never really sat down and thought about it. Have you sort of sat down and thought about that?
Yeah, it's funny. I had a writer friend. He did a little write-up one time, and he'd kind of phrased it the way you're phrasing it, sort of the realization of what you potentially have to give up. And you never really think about those things going into it. But when I look back now, Greg, I say to myself, like, when I first retired, because I've always enjoyed writing. I've written thousands of police reports, and I always prided myself on writing a good, detailed, thorough, accurate police report. And just as equal, I've prided myself on having this just ridiculously asinine sense of humor. And using lots of humor to my advantage, in interview rooms, in interrogation rooms. It went a long way. Even if you were just being a smartass to the person you were interrogating, it 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 was helpful. And so that blend, now later in life, I started to try to write a little bit of some of my adventures and some of my cases when I first retired. And I look back and I'm reading some of this stuff. I'm like, this is absolute shit. Nobody's gonna know how to read this. Like, it's so dark, it's so deep. My first I was telling you my first case, but I was in burglary when this guy blew his brains out. Well, you don't forget your first cases. As a death scene investigator, when it was official, my first one was the Soupy Lady. And this woman committed suicide by taking a concoction of pills and just checking out. Well, she checked out in her jacuzzi, and she chased the pills with some, adult beverage. And it was a few days before she was found. So when we got there, what happened was, not to be overly graphic, but she was a black female, and in life, she was absolutely gorgeous. Like, I saw her wedding pictures when I was talking to her husband, and just a really beautiful woman. Not so much that day. That day she was bloated. She had skin slippage. Her skin was falling off, and her hair, because her hair was kind of thick, it was actually getting caught in the jacuzzi. And so we were there, and like every 20 minutes, the jacuzzi would kick on. It would scare the hell out of us the first time it did it. But then all of her fluids were mixing around in this jacuzzi, and it looked like a giant pot of stew, to be honest with you. And so I remember when I retired, I thought, you don't forget your first things. And I was writing on this, and I'm looking back, and I had some other people look at it, and I'm like, this really is utter shit. It's so dark. And I don't want people just to be exposed to that just for the sake of being exposed to it, because the reactions that people get, it shuts them down. And so my whole thing is, now I'm writing stuff, and I'm in a much different mindset, and I'm able to write about all this stuff, and I inject my humor and all the absolute ridiculously silly things that happen, or some of the conversations that I've had with street people who were just absolutely a riot with some of their ebonics or some of their street way of phrasing stuff is absolutely hilarious. And so I want people to not so much look and go, oh, all these sacrifices you made, as much as I want them to see, you know what, even in the hardest roads that you have to walk down, there's still a piece of redemption that we can gain from it. There's, even in all of this pain, you can still get a smile on your face, or get some sort of peace in your heart, whether you're the person doing the investigating or whether you're the victim of the family. And so that's kind of where I'm at these days when I'm looking at all this collective stuff.
So your prize is the accomplishment, not the praise.
Correct.
Yeah.
You got it.
I can tell that about you. It's pretty obvious that that it sounds like, and I'm gonna rephrase. It sounds like whenever you're assigned a case, there's definitely a weight associated with it. And for you, a lot of times it's bringing voice to the voiceless. It's those victims that can't speak for themselves, or even if they could, they wouldn't have the right words to use to defend themselves. And so you're step up, you're going to be their champion. But at the end of the day, the accomplishment is seeking justice. It's not, hey, good job. Hey, here's a medal. Hey, here's a write-up in the newspaper. It's because it's the right thing.
Yeah. Some guys do it for the medals or the pat on the backs, or, I've had the splashes in the newspaper, being interviewed by a TV or this or that. And there's a place for all of that. But at the end of the day, if that's what's driving you, I think you're approaching all this for the wrong reason. if what's driving you is to actually get justice for these people, then, at 2 o'clock in the morning when you're getting called out, you can keep pushing yourself because you're doing it for the right reasons. And that's just kind of how I tried to approach it. I mean, I'm not perfect, obviously. I made plenty of mistakes, but I tried to just kind of say, this is my life's work. For me, this is the best way to get a reward, is just knowing that you're just doing it for the right reasons.
I like that. I like that a lot. You're a lot closer to my personality than maybe you suspect. So something that also was curious to me, because it's a whole world that you live in that I have really no real visibility into. It's if there was it could be multiple, one misconception about being detective, that you think most people have, or, most media portrays, that you could correct. What do you think that would be?
Good question.
Because there's a lot. I mean, obviously you guys don't just go from donut shop to donut shop all day.
Yeah, for me it was Starbucks. Actually we solved more cases in Starbucks when we were just taking a break. The guy I was telling you about that stabbed his roommate 19 or 20 times. I'm going to go off on a little tangent here and tell you the story. The guy that was my translator, he happened to be a lieutenant. He didn't work in criminal investigations. And we had been up, at that point, we had been up well over 24 hours. I'm like, dude, we need to get some coffee. I need to just rest my brain for a minute. So we're sitting in Starbucks and we're drinking a coffee. Now, I had already interviewed the driver that drove the suspect and his cousin up to the apartment. I'd already interviewed him, charged him with his charges, already interviewed the cousin, did the longer interview with the cousin because he admitted to stabbing one time. So they're down at the detention center, getting held. This is the same day. And I'm drinking my coffee. And all of a sudden I look at this guy, his name was AJ, and I said, that motherfucker. And it came completely out of the blue. He's like, what? I said, that motherfucker. And he goes, what? Come on, we're going down to the jail. He's like, well, I don't understand. I said, the cousin, he knows exactly where the suspect is. He knows exactly where he is. So we drove down there, pulled him out, and he told us that the suspect's sister lived up in Nassau County, New York, and that's where the suspect went after he got rid of the knife that he used. He threw it in a dumpster 2 counties over from where we were. We found the knife, found his clothes. He went up there. So I told the guy, I said, this is what you're going to do. We're going to reroute the phone through, we're at the jail. So I rerouted the call through our dispatch so that, a government number wouldn't come up. And you're going to call up there and you're going to talk to the female cousin who's the sister of the suspect. And you're going to say such and such and such and such. So he called up. He didn't say such and such and such and such. So he hung the phone up. And I said, we're going to call again because you didn't do it right the first time. We call back. This time the sister doesn't take the phone call. She open line and then hangs the phone up. And with that, my instinct told me he's up there. 100% he's up there. Well, this cousin who helped us, he got into the fetal position at the jail and he started wailing. He started crying. And I'm like, what's the deal with this guy? And that's when he came off with he's going to kill me. He's going to kill me for telling you where he was. He's going to kill me. I was like, why do you say that? And that's when he gave up. He killed these 5 other people in El Salvador. So, I don't know. Just the psychology of all that fascinates me. What makes people tick. So
something we do kind of in the IT world is we do this thing called rubber ducky debugging. It's this idea where, I mean, it could be any inanimate object, but you set a rubber ducky in front of you and you explain the problem you have to this inanimate object and you work through the things you've done. And there's something about saying it out loud that just knocks something loose, and it puts into, I don't know, when you manifest it into the universe, it somehow you come up with a solution. I was just curious, do you guys ever sit around and just sort of rubber ducky debugged each other? It's like, this is what I've been working through. And because I assume that each one of you guys have unique experiences, and you could hear, a certain set of events occurring or some evidence or whatever, and it's just going to click to something you've heard in the past. I was just curious how much collaboration you guys do on that sort of thing.
A lot, and I wasn't kidding. More cases were solved brainstorming at Starbucks while you were just trying to turn your brain off and rest for a little bit. And we would many times, I know, like the cold case investigator that was involved with the bones under the shed case, he and I spent countless hours talking about that case because of the unique situation that it was, trying to come up with different legal ways to get on that property. And so if you're doing it right, if you're doing your job right, it's just like in the high-tech world, talking to the rubber ducky, you are constantly fine-tuning whatever you've developed, whether it's good at talking to people. Hey, I'm good at talking with someone. Let's go try to talk to Boo Boo and see if Pookie really knows about whatever. Or a lot of times, there was an old saying that was 1000% true, and that is, you start working a case and you develop a physical, literal case file. And a case file could be one book this thick. It could be 8 books that thick of stuff that you're collecting as you go along. Well, the old adage is the answer to your question is in your case file. The person who committed this homicide, the answer to who committed it is in the case file. And it absolutely is in the case file. And you might look at that case file 30 times and you're like, I've looked at this thing 30 times. I've looked it over. I've damn near memorized it. But the answer is there. I had a case one time. The answer was there in a set of phone records that I was combing through. It was one phone call. The guy never talked to this person before, never talked to him after, other than this one phone call. This one phone call was the person who also had an interest in the victim being killed. And the answer was right there. And so the collaboration comes when, for example, the guy that sat across from me, he was the tech guy. He could backwards and forwards. He knew phone technology. He knew how the towers, if they were hit on this side of the tower, they would go geographically to 3/4 of a mile but if it hit on this side, it could go 4 miles. And so this side happened to be the side where something happened. And so we could place the person there or whatever. And so a lot of times you find someone whose strong suit is something that yours isn't. And so this was a younger detective, and he was very adroit at the tech stuff. So I'd be like, can you do me a favor? Can you just look this stuff over? And that sometimes that one little tiny piece will lead you to the next thing. I guess I was old school. I'm 55. So when I was coming up through detectives, we didn't sit behind the desk on our computer and try to figure it out electronically. We had to get out and knock on doors. We had to go down into the inner city neighborhoods and do our very best, like sticking out like a sore thumb. We had to do our very best to try to build a rapport with someone who didn't want to talk to you and try to get information. But you know what? A lot of times, if you're enough of a pain in the ass to people, they'll give you something just to get rid of you, and then that'll give you the next person, and eventually you hit on the right person that's willing to give you just the right of information.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So it's just one breadcrumb to the next sort of thing.
Sometimes it's painstaking, but that's what you have to do to put the case down. Yeah.
That's really interesting. So another question I had is, what do you think is, for random Joes like me, what do you think is the most surprising to normal folks about being a detective, whether it's homicide or not?
What's the most surprising thing?
Yeah. What do you think regular schmucks would find the most surprising? Which is subjective because you've been a detective so long. It's like you're so far removed from that. But
I think people would be, and I don't say this in like trying to scare people or whatever, but I think people would be genuinely surprised in a fearful way if they realized like just how many illegal guns are floating around and how sinister people really are. Like, and I guess my definition of sinister might be different from yours or your listeners, but for instance, I worked a case. I had to go to Southwest DC, and I had to pull this girl up and talk to her on this case, and she was just kind of peripheral on the case. And I remember my partner and I, and my partner, this guy I worked with, we were in the academy together. He was just a beast. I mean, the dude could lift like 400 pounds. He could bench press 400 pounds. He was just a beast. Wasn't scared of anything. And we roll up to this area, and we had to go talk to the cousin of the victim. We had tracked her down to where she lived, and we got out, and we had to walk past these 5 or 6 guys, and we clearly did not belong in this neighborhood, and they clearly ran the neighborhood. And of the 6 guys, I'm looking. It's it's dark at night, but it's enough where you can see. And 5 of them had something in their dip. Something was bulging out. So I'm 1,000% convinced at least 5 of the 6 guys had guns on them. And my only thought was, we were talking about earlier about your serial killers and how they can pick their victim out. It's all how you carry yourself. And so I knew how my partner carried himself, and we weren't going to just say, oh, well, we can't walk past these guys. We'll do this another day. We're here. We're going to go talk to her. And I thought, we have to walk past these guys. And in my thought process, I thought at that moment, now you have to learn how to use your mouth. I mean, you have to learn how to talk to people, because you can get hurt very quickly if you don't. And I thought, I know how to use it wisely. And I know that my partner does also. So I knew we're not going to say anything stupid in this moment. But that doesn't mean one of those 6 aren't going to say something stupid. And that's all it took. Just one stupid thing, and the game is on. And I thought in that moment, this is one of those moments where I might or might not go home. I don't know. Like, I'm ready to pull my gun because I can see 5 of them have guns, and all one of them has to do is say, "What the fuck are you doing here?" And then the confrontation is on. And it didn't happen. And so we got through, and we did our thing. And to say that you're not scared in that moment, you're a complete liar. Of course you're scared. We're humans. We get scared. But we left there, and I thought, Jesus, there's 5 of these guys, and not one of those guns is registered. So the shit is floating around. And we had to go there to another part of town to get up with another young lady. And we go there. She's in this high rise, and we managed to get in this building. We knock on the door. It's a 1-bedroom apartment, and her and Dad, her actual dad, are in bed together when we knock on the door. And it was just one of those things where it feels really creepy and sleazy and slimy when the door opens, because they were messing around in the bed before we knocked on the door, and now she's trying to secrete herself in a way from us seeing her when Dad opens the door. And Dad's being all evasive, and he had to put some pants on to get to the door. And so I'm saying that because here you have this one extreme, you have the guns, then you have over here, you have this incestual relationship, and you think, people are so screwed up on this planet. I'm screwed up, you're screwed up. I mean, we're all screwed up. It's just, to what degree do we manifest this? And there's just there's so much of it that I think people would be surprised at how much the thin blue line really separates our this amazing country we live in from going into total anarchy if that line is erased. So not to get you know not to get political on you, but when I see some of these cities like Portland, or I see some of these places and they want to defund the police, I think there's not one politician that has anyone's best interest at heart if they want to defund the police. That can only do nothing but hurt the citizens in that area. And I'll tell you something else that people might find surprising. There were times where I was in, and people may get offended by this term, but I was in some of the roughest. I had to go into some of the roughest ghettos to deal with some of the shit. And I will tell you something. In some of those areas, there are some of the hardest working people that are in there. They just happen to be poor. They happen to be low and can't afford to live somewhere else because, believe me, if they could, they would. And they live there. And all they want to do, they want to go to work and they want to put food on the table for their kids and they want to move about their business. But they can't because their area is crime ridden. And I think people would be surprised by that too, of the number of people in those areas that are actually very pro-police, but they have, that area is just infested with these crime rats that are doing all this shit. And it's like, those are the people that you feel for because they're legitimately decent people. I can't tell you how many times I had to go do an investigation, knock on these doors. You never know what's on the other side of the door. And this person will open the door and they freely invite you in. Like, you're not doing the interview on the stoop because they don't want to give you the time of day. They invite you in, give you the best seat in their house, offer you a drink, bring you some water or a tea or a soda, offer you some cookies or food or whatever. And we have this thing so, mixed up sometimes with how things are in certain areas.
Yeah, I guess it's, and it's, I don't know if you would categorize it like this way, but I think most people are good people. They're decent and they're just trying to get through the day, just like everybody else, right?
That most people are, you have to constantly remind yourself that the majority of the people that you deal with that are doing these awful things are a very tiny minority that's of people, I'm talking about population wise, and they're making life miserable for everyone else. And those are the who are dealing with, day in and day out in your career or whatever.
All right. Well, let's close it on a high note. So I want to ask you one more question is, what surprised you most about the job in a good way that you would have maybe never expected or just not anticipated wholly, that you think maybe changed you for the better?
I think that humanity in general, but there were people along the way who I would be the last, in my eyes, I would be the last person to think they would go to bat for, to thank, to send me a card, to make a phone call and talk to a supervisor and give a that a boy along the way or whatever. And they stepped up when it was a risk for them to do so. And so that helped me to, keep my faith in humanity. Like there are people that will surprise you that draw the line and do the right things for the right reasons. Quick example. In fact, when I was in burglary, this guy was terrorizing the entire county. He would drive on a bike on all the little bicycle paths around the area. And he was a total opportunist. He would go and he would steal stuff out of people's he was doing like multiple burglaries. I'm talking about hundreds of burglaries. Never would get caught. The guy would never get caught. Everyone knew he was a burglar. He was a burglar for like 20 years, but he drew the line at murder. And one day he was out, guess when, 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, doing his little burglary. And he drove by and he saw this chick choking the shit out of another girl, and she killed this girl who was like her roommate in college, strangled her at this parking lot of a community pool. He saw it, and then basically saw her get dumped out on the parking lot. He phones the police. He tells the police why he was out in so many words. He's like, you know why I was out. He came to court and testified and basically said, I'm no angel, but that was his words. I draw the line at murder. He told the police that, he told the judge that, or he told the attorney cross-examining him that. I draw the line, and this is where I draw the line. And that surprised me. So that's why you have to, in a good way, that's why you always have to remain open. Even if you're talking to a knucklehead in an interview room, you have to remain open to the possibility of this person just might surprise you and help you one day. And they do. And there are people that surprise you and help you and actually make you shine and make you look good. And you didn't ask for them to do that. They were the last person you would think would do that.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. It's, it kind of goes to, never assume, malicious intent, like just with the people, maybe not necessarily in your line of work, but just with the people around you, right? It's like, people don't generally mean to hurt your feelings or say something stupid. It's just, so if you assume positive intent, usually, your day goes a little bit easier, I think.
I agree.
All right, Daniel, I am very conscious of time. I try and, be very respectful of it. So I know we're definitely we're a little bit over the 2 hour mark. So I wanted to give folks the opportunity that are listening, if they are interested in you and what you do and your soon to be book, because I know you're working on one right now. How would you have them engage with you on the internet? Is there any way you'd like them to follow you or connect with you? What would you like?
I didn't really think about that, Greg. I appreciate you asking me that. I guess just LinkedIn right now is the only way. I've got my email there. I can give you my email address if they want to get in contact with me. It's D Lenick, Lenick, followed by the number 100, and that's it at gmail.com. You should have interviewed me like 6 months from now, and then I could have plugged my book. But I'm tentatively the title is Cordially Invited to Death. And I basically, there's one main case that I'm talking about, and I'm going to try to weave a redemptive thread throughout the book, and then I'll speak about some other funny things that happen at other cases. But like I don't have a website or anything like that right now.
That's cool. Well, I got to get you before you're too famous, otherwise you wouldn't have the time of day for me. All right. Well, Daniel, I appreciate your time and energy, and you didn't shy away from a single question. You were obviously not a burglar because you were very forthcoming with all of your information. I really appreciate the insight, and I like how introspective you are on where you came from, what you were doing, and then I guess now your second life as becoming an author. I think it's awesome. So thank you for your time, and hope I talk to you soon.
And I really appreciate your style, and I appreciate you giving me this opportunity. It's been awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, now's where I hit stop on all the recording stuff.